I'm going to let everyone stream in slowly. Thank you everyone for being on time for this webinar. We're very excited to get started. And welcome to an introduction to the lizards of Southeast Asia, which is, of course, delivered by Jordi Janssen and Emerson Sy. So this webinar is very proudly brought to you by the Herpetological Society of Singapore, and we're very happy to be kindly supported by the wonderful folks over at John Beaufoy Publishing. Right. Like to start this with a little bit of an introduction to the Herpetological Society of Singapore. So a lot of folks here are calling in from overseas. So you may not be aware that Singapore has a Herpetological Society because we're quite a small group, but we do a lot of really interesting work with respect to outreach and education. So you can see here, we actually have one of our members. This is Shiva. He's giving a talk about colubrids, a group of snakes, to members of the public. So we're really trying to mainstream the idea of herpetology and get people to appreciate the fact that we're living alongside reptiles and amphibians. Which is why when John reached out to us about organizing this webinar, we were completely sold, because getting people to appreciate the wildlife that lives alongside them, we have to start somewhere, and that begins with people recognizing what kind of biodiversity they share their landscape with. And that really is what this wonderful book, An Introduction to the Lizards of Southeast Asia, actually accomplishes, right? So just an example of the kind of outreach that we do, much of our outreach is done offline. So you can see here is a guided walk that we do with the HSS. Roughly once a month, we do guided walks with members of the public. We bring tens of people out into the green spaces of Singapore, and we show them that despite being a highly urbanized island, we actually share our space with some wonderful and quite overlooked species of snakes, lizards, frogs, reptiles, and amphibians in general. So of course, we can't, in a changing world, we can't stay completely offline. So some of our online activities include things like webinars, and we're very happy to be collaborating with JBP, John Beaufoy Publishing, today to be bringing this webinar to all of you wonderful folks. So I'm going to hand the time over to John to share a little bit about John Beaufoy Publishing, the story of this book, and some of the other interesting titles that JBP has out there. Take it away, John.
All right, Sankar, thank you very much indeed, and hello to everybody. It's fantastic that we've got such a global audience this afternoon, this evening, this morning for some of you. I'm actually joining the webinar from Budapest in Hungary, although my usual location is Oxford, UK, which is where JB Publishing is based. We're a UK-based publisher. We specialize in natural history, wildlife, and conservation, and we have a special focus, as many of you will know already, on publishing books for and about the Indo-Pacific region of the world. I'm just going to hold up here the latest JB catalog. This is our 2021-22 catalog. It's got a lot of very exciting new titles in it, including the latest addition to our herpetological collection, which is Lizards of Southeast Asia. Now, this lizard book is joining a number of other excellent herpetological books which we've published in recent years. I'm going to start just by mentioning the Australian books, which my friend and colleague Scott Iper has been responsible for putting together. We've got frogs, we've got lizards, and we've got snakes of Australia. We've also got a book on lizards of Australia. We've got the excellent reptiles and amphibians of Bali by Ruchira Somawira. We have reptiles of India. We have reptiles of Sri Lanka by Anselm de Silva. And we have many other exciting books in the pipeline, including a book about the reptiles of the Philippines, which is being written by one of today's speakers, Emerson Sy, and our great friend, colleague, and collaborator, Dr. Indraneel Das, is working on a very exciting field guide to the reptiles of Borneo, and more on that one anon. So I'm really delighted to be celebrating the launch of Lizards of Southeast Asia to add to our herpetological list. I'd like to talk a little bit about the genesis of the book and how it came about, because it's been a little while in the making, and we go all the way back to those pre-pandemic days when the world was a very different place from the one we inhabit today. I'm going back 5 years to 2017, and my friend and colleague Chris Shepherd, who I'm absolutely delighted is joining us on the webinar this evening. And Chris wrote a guide to the Naturalist Guide to the Mammals of Southeast Asia in our Naturalist Guide series, and was working with Jordi and Emerson and suggested to us all that a book on lizards in the same series would fill a very big gap in the literature, the herpetological literature of Southeast Asia. So I was put in touch with Jordi and Emerson. We very quickly reached agreement to publish the book, and we started work on it. And then the pandemic came along. That put quite a brake on our publishing activities as the world shut down. Now that we're emerging from that period, we've got a lot of interesting books which had been in production, which we're now able to release onto the market. And Lizards of Southeast Asia is a good example of one of those titles. So I'm very grateful to Chris Shepherd for having put us all together and got this book off the ground. 5 years later, here we are celebrating its publication. Fantastic. So I'd just like to say a very big thank you to Sankar for hosting this webinar. We've really enjoyed working with HerpSoc in Singapore, and I hope there are going to be a lot of very exciting collaborations to come. And now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers this afternoon and the authors of the book. First of all, Jordi Janssen from the Netherlands is an ecologist, a conservationist, and a herpetologist. Jordi works as a program officer for the Monitor Conservation Research Society and is particularly studying the trade in reptiles and amphibians. Jordi's co-author, Emerson Sy, is a herpetologist based in Manila. He is a consultant for Traffic International Southeast Asia and a board member of the Biodiversity Conservation Society of the Philippines. I'd like to welcome them both to the webinar. I'm very grateful for them both giving us their time to talk to us about lizards of Southeast Asia. And I will now formally hand over to Jordi and Emerson to talk about their subject. Thank you.
John, thank you for the kind introduction. And of course, thank you to the Herp Society in Singapore for having us today. Let me share my screen. So today we will give you an introduction to the lizards of Southeast Asia. I will start with a slide showing you how many species there are in Southeast Asia, where you can find them, and to what families they belong. Then after that, we will slowly discuss each of these families in a little bit more detail and show you one or two examples of each of these families. And then I will give it over to Emerson, and Emerson will discuss where you can find the lizards, some very interesting natural history observations, and of course the conservation of lizards in Southeast Asia. So at the time of writing our book, there were roughly 7,059 lizard species in the world, of which 1,122 were found in Southeast Asia. So roughly 16% of all lizard species globally were found in this region. Of these 1,100 lizards, about 900 are only documented for one country within Southeast Asia. So that does not mean that 80% of these species is endemic, because some of these also occur outside Southeast Asia, but it does, yeah, it's quite a big species richness. So about 33% or 360 species of lizards can be found in Indonesia, making it the country with the highest species richness within this region. And the lowest numbers of lizard species have been documented for Timor-Leste, Brunei, and Singapore. About Singapore has 36 species have been documented for Singapore. So here you can see the map clearly showing that Indonesia has the highest number of species. So this map also shows quite a bit that the effort that has went into the describing of new species and into the herpetological work, especially in the last couple of years. A lot of new species have been described in Myanmar, Laos. So that some countries are quite light on this map does not mean that the diversity is not there, just merely that they haven't been described so far. So all of these lizards are divided over 11 families, of which the agamids, the typical geckos, and the skinks make up for 92% combined. And the typical geckos have the highest number of species with 472, followed by the skinks with like 394 species. And during the presentation, I will show at each family how many of these species can be found in Singapore specifically. And if we show you a photo of a lizard with the flag of Singapore, it shows that that species can be found in Singapore. Now, for each of these lizard families, we will discuss how many species there are, if they belong to one genus or multiple genera, and where in Southeast Asia you can find them. And of course, we'll show you one or two examples. The agamids, this is a group of diurnal and mostly arboreal lizards. And in Southeast Asia, you can find 174 species, which are divided over 27 genera. They range from like the smaller Draco species to the much larger Hydrosaurus species. I'll show you an example of the latter one in a bit. Many Southeast Asian species are often found near water bodies, but you can find them in an incredibly large range of habitats. They're often seen sleeping on branches or on tree trunks at night. And many species have very large neutral or dorsal crests. They can have very colorful gular pouches. They have patagial or rostral appendages. Most of these species feed on arthropods, although some of them are also herbivorous. As you can see on this map, the highest number of species has been documented for Indonesia, followed by Malaysia. And in Singapore specifically, there have been 7 agamid species documented. This is the Kinabalu crested dragon, a very robust looking lizard. It has a very well developed neutral crest and a little bit smaller dorsal crest. It's characterized by the big scale below the tympanum. You can see it right in the middle. It's a species that's only found in northern Borneo and Gunung Kinabalu in Sabah, Malaysia. And like many agamids, it's diurnal, it's arboreal. And you can primarily find it in submontane and montane forests, roughly between 900 and 1600 meters above sea level. The species there is often found on tree trunks or, for instance, on tree ferns. This is the Philippine sylvan lizard. It's one of the largest agamids in this region. It's characterized by its high sail on its tail, which can grow up to like 8 centimeters high. The sail is much more prominent on males than on females, and it can also be used as a propeller when they're like swimming. But the species also has a small crest running across the neck and the dorsal area, and this species is endemic to the Philippines. Like many agamids, it's also primarily a diurnal, herbivorous species, a very strong swimmer, and can be found in various lowland habitats. It's been found in mangroves, coastal forests, or on the banks of small streams and rivers. Then we continue with the glass lizards. The family of glass lizards resembles snakes, but in fact they are limbless lizards. These heavy-bodied species are generally diurnal in nature. They are terrestrial or semi-fossorial and can often be found in open areas or forests. No, even though they look like snakes, they are not, and they're actually capable of dropping their tail when they feel threatened. So in Southeast Asia, there have been 6 species documented. They all belong to the same genus. As you can see on the map, the majority is found in Vietnam, and none of these species has been documented for Singapore. So this is the Burmese glass lizard. It's a very large, robust lizard that can be found in Myanmar, northern and northeastern Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, but it's also found in India, Bangladesh, and southern China. So it's one of those species which range extends beyond Southeast Asia. It's a diurnal and terrestrial species which plays dead when it feels threatened, and you can find it in submontane and montane forests. And then we continue with another limbless lizard family. The blind lizards, they are also snake-like lizards. They have small, close-fitting, glossy scales, and they completely lack their forelimbs. They do, however, have vestigial hind legs that's sort of been reduced to like scaly flaps. So, and just like the glass lizard, blind lizards can drop their tails when they feel threatened. So they're very secretive and fossorial in nature. They are rarely found on the surface, but more often you can find them under logs. So for Southeast Asia, there have been 21 species documented. And as you can see on the map, the highest number of species has been documented for Indonesia, followed by Malaysia. So all these 21 species belong to the same genus, and no species of this family have been documented for Singapore. This is an example. This is Flowers blind lizard. It's a worm-like and almost cylindrical legless lizards. In this species, females lack the hind limbs that are characteristics of males of this genus. And this species is only known from the montane forest of Fraser's Hill in peninsular Malaysia. So there it can be found digging through the leaf litter along banks of roads. And it's also been found hiding beneath soil during the day. So this species flares up its body scales as a defensive mechanism when disturbed. And that's something that's very typical of species from this genus. Then we continue with like the eyelid geckos. This family of eyelid geckos is found in Asia, North America, Africa. And species in this family have like fleshy eyelids and very soft skin. And in contrast to most other geckos, they can blink. So species within this family, they occur in like a very wide range of habitats. And within Southeast Asia, 6 species have been documented, all belonging to 2 different genera. And only one of these has been documented in Singapore. As you can see, the far majority of these 6 occurs in Vietnam. This is the Vietnamese leopard gecko. It's a gecko species characterized by its neutral loop and 4 thick body-like bands between the forelimbs and the hind legs. It's a species that is found in northern Vietnam and China. It's mostly nocturnal. It can be found active on rocky surfaces, and occasionally it can be found on the forest floor. It's a species that inhabits relatively dry, rocky or karst areas covered with tropical rainforest. And frequently the best place to find them is on north-facing slopes. So the typical geckos, one of the largest lizard families globally, and also in this region. These geckos inhabit a very wide range of habitats. And at the time of writing this book, there were 472 species recognized for Southeast Asia. But new species are still being described on a fairly regular basis. And that's not just for these geckos, but for all lizard families in Southeast Asia. So these 472 species, they belong to 11 genera, with the highest number of species documented for Malaysia, followed by Indonesia and Thailand. And in Singapore, you can actually find 17 different species that belong to this family. And to give you an example, this is the Sabah skill-toed gecko. It's a species that can be found in Malaysian Borneo. It's a nocturnal gecko. It's an arboreal species. And occasionally you can also find it on man-made structures. As you can see, one of the things that looks really awesome is its very dark eye on this species. Another example of one of the typical geckos, and this is a short-handed bent-toed gecko. It's a cryptic colored bent-toed gecko with like a silver eye. The species also has a prehensile tail. It's a nocturnal gecko. It's an arboreal species. And it can be found in Thailand, where it primarily inhabits rainforests, roughly around 750 meters above sea level. And the species has been observed on trees, but also beneath like dead bark on trees. Then we continue with the Eurasian lizards. This includes the East Asian and Southeast Asian genus of Tachydromus, the Oriental grass lizards. Now, for Southeast Asia, 5 species have been documented. They all belong to the same genus. And the majority of these species can be found in Vietnam. So species of this genus are characterized by their very long tails and their keeled scales. And even though they occur quite widely in Southeast Asia, none of these have been documented for Singapore so far. As you can see, the majority of species here also occurs in Vietnam. This is the Asian grass lizard. It's a species that's mostly characterized by its very slender body with a tail and with a very long tail. And that tail can actually be between 3 and 5 times longer than its body itself. It's a relatively widespread species. It's common in Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam. It's a diurnal species. It can be arboreal. Sometimes you find it on the ground as well. It's a diurnal. It's mainly found in open areas. You can find it in grassland areas, marshes, also up to like 850 meters above sea level. And sometimes you can also find it on the edge of a small town or a city. Then we continue with the next family. This family actually only includes a single species. It's a secretive and semi-fossorial and semi-aquatic lizard that is primarily found in lowland rainforests on the island of Borneo. You can see it on the circle. That's where it can be found. And then the species does not occur in Singapore. And that species is the Borneo Earless monitor. It's a very slender and elongated monitor lizard. It's the only monitor lizard species that it has its own family and does not belong to the Varanidae genus. It's a species that's endemic to the island of Borneo. It's been documented in Malaysia, Indonesia, and it's probably also found in Brunei. It's a very secretive monitor lizard. It's strictly nocturnal. By day, it can be found hiding in burrows along riverbanks. It can hide under rocks or logs. And it's primarily found near lowland streams and marshes. It can also be found in like small streams on agricultural land. And the flat-footed lizards, these lizards are often also mistaken for snakes. These lizards completely lack forelimbs, but do have the vestigial hind limbs that are reduced to like scaly flaps. They move in like snake-like fashion, prey on other lizards and arthropods. And although most of these flat-footed lizards are found in Australia, 2 species can be found on the island of New Guinea. of which one is actually endemic to the island. And both species belong to the same genus and can be found within the circle on this map. None of these have been documented for Singapore. This is a Gekkonidae snake lizard. It's a snake-like lizard with a very distinctive flat-tipped pointed snout. The snout is slightly pointed upwards, and its color can vary a lot between grayish, brownish, or even like a pinkish brown color. And within Southeast Asia, this species is found in eastern and northeastern part of Papua province, and also in Papua New Guinea. It's a largely diurnal species that's relatively common throughout its range. It can be found in grasslands, savannas, woodland areas, swamp areas, and on the edges of lowland rainforests. But people have also documented these species in their gardens. It's a species that's primarily found in the coastal provinces, but sometimes also in highland areas where it's been documented up to like 1,600 meters above sea level. And then the skinks. The skinks, this is also one of the largest lizard families. It's a group of lizards that is widely distributed across the globe, where they inhabit a wide range of habitats. And at the time of writing our book, 394 species were documented for Southeast Asia, and these were divided across 34 genera. So the highest number of species is found in Indonesia and the Philippines. And for Singapore, 8 species have been documented. So we'll start with the Philippine giant skink. It's a large, robust skink endemic to the Philippines. It's often seen foraging under leaves or logs and in open spaces during the day. It's a species that is found between 250 meters, 200 and 500 meters above sea level. And this, the red-eyed crocodile skink, it's personally one of my favorite lizard species. It's a very robust skink with a large triangular head. You can see like the bony crest on the back of its head. And the red semicircle around its eye is the main characteristic for this species. But they also have like 4 rows of backwards pointed spikes on the back, which makes them look like a baby crocodile, basically. It's a species that can be found in the northern part of the island of New Guinea, where they occur both in Papua and West Papua provinces of Indonesia. And they can also be found in Papua New Guinea. It's a very secretive species. They live in like small family groups of an adult pair and their offspring. They're one of the few skinks that can vocalize very loudly when are disturbed. And that sounds like a baby crocodile in distress. It's a species that is often found in or near streams. They live under rotten logs and leaf litters, but they've also been documented on coconut plantations where they are found in like the coconut husk piles, basically the leftovers. And when this species is threatened, they will actually jump into the water and they can stay submerged for, if I remember correctly, almost 30 minutes. Then we continue with the crocodile lizards. This family consists of only 1 species and actually 2 subspecies, of which one of the subspecies is found in Southeast Asia. It's a subspecies that's only found in Vietnam. It's a type of lizard that's semi-aquatic, it's diurnal, and it's quite secretive in nature. And that's this species. That is the Vietnamese crocodile lizard. It's a very robust lizard with a very short head. The Vietnamese subspecies is found in northeastern Vietnam, where it can be found in evergreen forests. It's a species that's often seen sleeping on branches above the water or in the vegetation surrounding the water. And when threatened, this species will also jump in the water, and they can also stay on the water for quite a long time. And then we continue with actually the last lizard family, the monitor lizards. Monitor lizards are distributed quite widely across the world. You can find them in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Australia, and Melanesia. And they range from very small to like the Komodo dragon, one of the largest lizard species in the world. And at the time of writing, there were 40 monitor lizard species documented for Southeast Asia. They either occur in Southeast Asia or completely restricted to Southeast Asia. And the highest number of species have been documented for Indonesia and the Philippines. For Singapore, 3 species have been documented. And these lizards can inhabit a very wide range of habitats. Some species are terrestrial, some are arboreal, and there are also semi-aquatic species in there as well. To give you some examples, this is the Mindanao water monitor. It's a very large water monitor characterized by bright yellow head. Species endemic to the Philippines. It's a terrestrial species, it's diurnal, and it can often be found in or near disturbed habitats. It can be found in farmlands or near forest edges. And while the juveniles of the species primarily feed on insects, the adults will feed on fish, crabs, mollusks, or carrion, so basically whatever they can find. This is a bit smaller monitor lizard species. This is the emerald tree monitor. It's a relatively small and bright green monitor lizard species that is found in Indonesia, within Southeast Asia. Within Southeast Asia, it's found in Papua and West Papua provinces and some of the surrounding islands. It's an arboreal species which has a long prehensile tail, which helps it move through the trees and maintain balance. It's a species that can be found in lowland rainforest, palm forest, mangroves, and sometimes it's also been documented in plantations. And then now I will give the word to Emerson, and he'll talk about where to find the lizards.
All right, thank you, Jordi. When we think about where lizard lives, typically we imagine a primary forest or a second growth forest, and it's where the most species can be found. In the last few decades, scientists are finding new species in seemingly barren places, such as the limestone karst forest. You can see it in the upper left picture. Especially in the Philippines, Laos, Vietnam, herpetologists are describing quite a bit of new species of geckos. Plantation, such as the oil palm and rice fields, you can see the more common species and more tolerant to human modified habitats. You know, the monitor lizards thrive in these places because of the increased population of prey, such as rodents. And as mentioned by Sankar earlier, highly urbanized cities such as Singapore, especially with the pockets of green spaces, can also host a lot of lizard species. Next slide, please. Okay, just a little bit about the natural history from clockwise from top left. This particular species is a sun skink. It's supposedly widespread across the region, but most likely it's a species complex, as exemplified by different habitats that they are occupying, as well as the prey items. As you can see, this particular individual is consuming a land crab. Usually they consume land vertebrates such as, you know, the typical food prey, crickets, grasshopper, and so on. But this particular population is quite unique, and they live in stream or river banks. and they mainly predate on crabs. The next one is a king cobra predating on a water monitor. You might be wondering what they're doing underwater. The backstory of this is when it was initially observed, it was on top of our roof, and the monitor lizard was still alive and struggling, and eventually they fell into the water. The king cobra managed to drag the subdued monitor lizard out of the water, but the people around it interrupted his meal, so he was not able to consume the water monitor. Most of you know that the king cobra was assumed to be exclusive snake eater until recently, in the last few decades. And more evidence are coming out that they also consume different species of monitor lizards. On the lower right, that's another monitor lizard, and this time it's consuming a introduced and toxic cane toad. As you've heard a lot of horror stories, especially in Australia, that some species of snakes and lizards are dying after ingesting or mounting the cane toad. But in this case, it seems like the water monitor is tolerant with the bufotoxin. And lastly, on the lower left, occasionally the prey predator relationship can be reversed. As you can see, the water monitor lizard consuming a small bronzeback snake. Next slide, please. Okay, one of the main tool in conservation is the IUCN Red List, wherein herpetologists across the region evaluate the species and to determine its threat status. As you can see from this graph, about 1% is assessed as critically endangered, and another 7% are in the endangered and vulnerable threat status. On the left-hand side of the graph, most of them, most of the species, like 40%, have not been evaluated, and another 15% do not have sufficient data to assess the threat status. So as you can see, about more than 50%, we don't know enough about them to assess their threat status. Next slide, please. We often hear that the biggest threat for not just the lizards but different wildlife, the biggest threat is habitat loss, degradation, or fragmentation, and especially with opening up of primary forests for agriculture or housing development. And this is true across our region. In certain places, the slash and burn farming is still being practiced, and it can have a devastating effect in certain population of lizards, especially those rely on the forest to thrive. Next slide, please. Another big reason for the lizards being highly threatened in our region is, of course, the wildlife trade. Not just the illegal wildlife trade, but the legal wildlife trade as well, because oftentimes wildlife trade can be unsustainable, and that it doesn't mean that because it's legal, it's sustainable. So I think it's really important that we study more about the trade issue and be conscientious about what we consume, and especially now with people who's getting interested in pet keepings and keeping exotic pets. Next slide, please. A lot of us, we like our pets, like the cats and dogs, but occasionally they can be destructive to native lizard species, as you can see in these two illustrations. The one on the left is obviously a cat that been allowed outdoor, and it was able to capture a sand skink, not necessarily to consume it, but perhaps just to play with it, and just to because of its strong hunting instinct. And the one on the right is a dog that's usually kept in the house or within the yard, but when it's in its own devices, it could also hunt wildlife, such as this particular monitor lizard. Next slide, please. So one of the oftenly asked questions is why we should care about wildlife or lizards in particular. And I think it is important to remember that they are integral part of our ecosystem. They play a crucial role as predators and prey for various species. And they are also important in nutrient cycling when they consume or being predated by other species. And other roles they play, some species, they consume nectars and they visit flowers and they pollinate specific plant species. And likewise, some species consume fruits. And when they do that, they don't digest the seeds. And as they go along the forest floor and defecate, they basically become the farmers of the forest. So obviously the lizards and other wildlife have important roles in ecosystem, and it's not just because of they are beautiful that we appreciate them, but there are a lot of ecological roles they play that we often neglect, and I think we should really appreciate more about their contribution to our ecosystem. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just a quick thank you to John Bifoy Publishing, especially to John and Rosemary for being patient and supportive about this project. Of course, the HSS for hosting this event, Perinia for reviewing this book, and all 37 photographers who contributed images. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordi and Emerson, for that really engaging presentation and a really nice in-depth look at the lizards of Southeast Asia. So, I mean, obviously, like, these are such diverse animals, right? So how can we get like I think it's a really tall order to ask for a snapshot of the diversity of lizards in Southeast Asia. And I think you guys did a really good job of showing us some examples of every single family. So I really enjoyed that. I'm sure judging by the very active chat, I think a lot of people also enjoyed that very much. There were a few questions, I think. So let me start the ball rolling. In the meantime, folks, if you have any questions, you can add those questions to the chat and I'll bring them up. But let me start with a bit of a softball question, but it's also something that I'm kind of interested in. Jordi and Emerson, what are your personal favorite lizards? So it doesn't have to be a Southeast Asian lizard. So what is your favorite lizard in the whole world? So maybe Jordi, you can go first.
My favorite lizard, probably all time, is the red-eyed crocodile skink. Already showed them in the presentation, and for a reason, of course. So yeah, that's definitely my favorite.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm actually watching this webinar with some friends of mine, and they were saying it looks like Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon. So I think that's probably why it's also very popular in the pet trade, right?
Yeah, they're quite popular. It occurs on the island of New Guinea. There's a similar looking species that's often called the white-eyed crocodile skink or the muddy crocodile skink. And yeah, you can both see them in pet trade, and they're quite popular.
Awesome. And Emerson, how about you?
My personal favorite is a pseudo gecko. It's a false gecko from the Philippines. It's a slender gecko with bright emerald yellow coloration and black spots. So it's a very interesting gecko, and unfortunately, they are also in the pet trade.
Oh, good. That's awful. It's always very depressing for me, at least, when there's like this really amazing species that people don't really encounter that much in the wild, and then it just shows up at like a reptile expo, and we never actually know how it got there in the first place because there's very little traceability and accountability in those circles sometimes. But yeah, thanks for sharing. I'll see if I can pull up a photo of that and show it later. We're already getting some questions in the chat. So maybe I'm going to ask the first question from Scott Iper. How did you select the species for the book? How did you choose what to keep inside the book and what you decide to leave out? Because like they're so diverse, right? So you must have had to make a choice. What was those decisions based on?
Yeah, definitely. Well, what was in the book changed over the years. We started with a selection of species based on how relatively abundant there were species that were commonly seen, but also make sure that the species are mostly represented in Southeast Asia would be mostly the species that were included. So if like 60% were agamids, we aimed for 60% of species in the book to be agamids. We started like that, and then along the way, it proved so difficult to get photos for certain species that at one point we were just like, okay, we see what species we can get, and they were included in the end. So some of them were species that have been described only recently. So yeah, so that's how we came up with selection, but we tried to make sure that if skinks were the most common, the majority of species featured in the book will be skinks. But to make sure that every family has at least some representatives in the book.
Yeah, I definitely, I think if you had like you could theoretically do a very comprehensive book just on one of these families. So it must have been a difficult choice to make. And reading through the book, I think it's a really well-chosen selection of lizards. Okay, another question from Chok Wen Shen from the HSS actually. Very interesting question for Jordi and Emerson. Based on your research so far, when looking at the reptile trade, Singapore, of course, is an important port for a lot of trade in general. Did you see any particular role that Singapore in particular was playing with respect to the reptile trade? And how does that compare to other Southeast Asian countries?
Do you want to answer this, Emerson, or shall I?
Yeah, my research is focused on, as far as the wildlife trade issue is concerned, my research is focused on the Philippines, and I have not seen reptiles being exported to Singapore, but Philippine reptiles have been smuggled to other Southeast Asian countries, such as Malaysia, Thailand, and so on. Yeah, but for other species such as the invertebrates, I've seen them being sent to Singapore.
Yeah, Singapore for lizards, not that much. If you look at snakes, Singapore's the biggest importer and exporter of snake skins, for instance. A lot of the snake skins move through Singapore, where they're held in warehouses and then exported to other countries. In terms of pet trades, yeah, there is a bit of trade, but it's not very significant.
Okay, well, that's, I guess, slightly comforting to know. Okay, what is the biggest lizard of Southeast Asia? You guys kind of covered this just now, the Komodo dragon. And yes, Scott also clarified. Lemuel asks for Emerson, we currently have synopsis of the Philippine snakes and amphibians. Is there any projects underway to do something similar for lizards in Philippines?
Yes, there is. It might take a while because of we have to go through a lot of published literature and make sure that we include all the known distribution by island. We have a tentative list, and we are hoping to release this sometime this year. So primarily to assist researchers and especially students, so they can have a checklist and to know the diversity of our lizards and other reptiles in the Philippines.
Awesome, excited to see it. Eric asks, how are photographers selected for these book projects and lizards of Southeast Asia in particular? I can share a little bit about that because I actually contributed one of the photos for this book, and I got sent a copy of the book by Leslie and John, and I have to say it's a wonderful book. But I was especially happy to see the photo of the Bornean horn lizard behind me right now, Apatosaurus borneensis, doing a little bit of shameless self-promotion here. Yeah, I mean, Jordi and Emerson, what was your process like when you were coming up with this book? How did you source the photos?
I think we started with looking at what photos we could cover ourselves. And then we started with a list of species that we wanted to include in the book. So we just started looking for people we knew and other herpetologists we knew within the region, asked like, hey, do you have a photo of one of these species? So that's basically how we did most of it. And then at one point, we just started to look online and see if like this species we want to include, who's the photographer, and then approach them. So like, can we use your photo? So that's basically, yeah, that's about how we went through selecting the photographers, and then just looking for a good quality photo.
Yeah, I think I found, I think you posted on Twitter at some point, and that's how I found your call and I responded to that. So for aspiring photographers, you can definitely look to social media. Many times there are researchers looking for good content that you can contribute to. Russell asks, is there an invasive lizard prominent here in Southeast Asia? So this was something I think maybe was not mentioned so much, but are there any lizards that are invasive or introduced of particular concern in Southeast Asia?
I would say the green iguana. It has been introduced in a few countries, and we have unconfirmed report here in the Philippines as well. Other lizards that might be become invasive would be the garden lizard. We have a record of that. However, before the taxonomic changes, we identified it as the common garden lizard, but it seems like it's not that particular species. So we're hoping to get a permit to collect specimens and to do a DNA study.
Okay. Yeah, I think definitely the answer to that question would vary depending on where you are. In Singapore, like you said, Emerson, we have the green iguanas. It just popped up quite recently, actually, and we're seeing them in surprising places every now and then. But we've also gotten recent reports of brown anoles from, yeah, which is quite concerning. But we've also had like some that are more established, like the garden lizard that you mentioned. So I think depending on where you go, you have a different answer to this question. I don't think there's one that is particularly prominent throughout Southeast Asia, just because of the diversity of habitats. Eric asks, what is the best channel to be in contact with the Herpetological Society of Singapore? Find us on Facebook. I'll share the social media links right after this. Okay, I'm going to ask just a couple more questions before we go on to the photo taking and the book promotion. Just one question that we had in our sign-up sheet that was pretty interesting is, why are there so many species of lizards in Southeast Asia? Because we don't see this kind of diversity if you say go further north, right? So, or south. So why is it that Southeast Asia seems to be such a hotspot for these?
Well, yeah, Southeast Asia is an incredible diversity in habitats. There's so many different niches available, especially in the last couple of years. You've seen that the been a lot more explorations of like the karst mountains in Myanmar, Laos, and every single mountain has a different species. They've just been isolated from each other. So it's just incredible diversity in different habitat types, going from like the mountains all the way to the rainforests next to the ocean. And that definitely facilitates large species richness in the area.
Yeah, I think I read a paper recently by Lee Larry Grismer, who was pointing out, and team of course, who was pointing out like the amazing like hyper-endemism that you see in those karst mountain. Yeah, the karst habitat is, I think, especially exciting, but also quite scary because it's also a quickly diminishing habitat. It's being constantly mined for the limestone, right? So that we're losing species that we don't even know exist around here. So that's something to be concerned about. One last question before we move on to the promotion is, to what extent is climate change and deforestation affecting, lizards in Southeast Asia? And, what are some solutions that are being implemented or not being implemented across Southeast Asia?
I think for the more tolerant species that tolerate the human modified habitats, they tend to take advantage of it. For example, the water monitor, they can consume carrion and rodents that are very abundant in farms and urban areas. However, there are species that are forest obligates, and we might not see them in the near future as if we continue to destruct these amazing habitats.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. So yeah, protect the forest, everyone. That's, I think, the message of the day. We have to protect the habitats so that we can continue to see these amazing animals into the future. Okay, I want to move on to the very exciting offers that are on for this book and several other titles from John Beaufoy Publishing. So I'm going to hand the time over to Leslie to share a little bit about these promotions. Leslie?
Thank you, Sanka. Good evening, everyone. I'm Leslie Lim. I work with John Beaufoy Publishing. We want to thank the HerpSoc for hosting this webinar. But for those of you who have taken the time and the effort to join in this webinar, we want to make it more easily available to you and at a special offer. So here on your screen, you see an exclusive promotion for this book with Kinokuniya in Singapore. This is their web store. Yes, if you scan that code, and you might just have to bring your phone a little closer to that QR code for it to kick in. Kinokuniya will offer you this book if you order it online at a 20% discount off its Singapore dollar price, and that offer is valid till the 30th of June. Yeah, we've also had a tie-up with Times Bookstore. If I can see it there in the next slide, you'll see this is, and Times Bookstore has extended the offer not just to this book, which is of course the leading book for tonight, but also 15 other John Beaufoy titles on natural history. So you have a whole range there of titles for which you can also order and enjoy a 20% discount. Like all e-commerce offers, you go through the process of selecting the book and ordering it, and just before you check out, there will be promo code. That's where you enter HSS20, and then your 20% offer will kick in. Yeah, I just want to say also that this is, I think, the first territory in the world to have this book. You can order this book online internationally. I see it elsewhere as you're having to wait 22 more days, I think, something like that. So if you want to get it in Singapore, that's where you can go. If you like to shop physically, you'll find it in Books Kinokuniya at Ngee City as well. Do pick the book up. Yes, 225 species. We didn't cover them all tonight, but just looking through the book myself, it is quite an amazing resource. So I hope you'll get the book and enjoy the whole experience. Thank you.